The blinding ring light reflected perfectly in my mother's eyes. She smiled into the camera lens, tossing her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder, announcing a $5,500,000 brand deal built entirely on her perfect triplet lifestyle. Millions of viewers flooded the chat with heart emojis. They bought the glossy, curated lie. Every single word of it, directly beneath her feet, surrounded by cold concrete and soundproofed walls. A cracked, smuggled tablet illuminated my shaking hands. Her live broadcast played across the shattered screen. I was 18 years old, and I was the secret fourth child. The biological backup plan kept locked in the dark, just in case one of her golden girls needed spare parts. Her pristine empire of three thrived in the sunlight. Her living insurance policy sat shivering in the basement. The basement was my entire universe. No windows. No natural light. Just the heavy, rhythmic hum of the mansion's ventilation system and the smell of industrial bleach. My mother, Morgan, built a massive social media empire on the miracle of her identical triplets. Vanessa, Erica, and Catherine were dressed in matching designer clothes, paraded across red carpets, and monetized before they could even walk. I was born exactly 4 minutes after Catherine. But 4 babies didn't fit the brand narrative. 4 babies meant high-risk complications, messy reality, and a flawed aesthetic. So, while my sisters were handed the world on a silver platter, I was handed a mattress on a concrete floor. My father, Marcus, simply looked the other way. He enjoyed the luxury cars and the custom golf clubs funded by his wife's brand deals far too much to ever grow a spine. Morgan controlled everything. She would walk down the wooden stairs once a day, the heavy deadbolt clicking behind her, bringing a tray of carefully measured food. She never looked at me with maternal warmth. She looked at me the way a mechanic looks at a spare tire. She would wrap a blood pressure cuff around my arm, shine a pen light into my pupils, and press cold fingers against my abdomen to check my organs. She caught me crying once when I was 12. I had been watching my sisters open mountains of birthday presents on the smuggled tablet. Morgan snatched the screen from my hands. Her voice dropped into a chilling, reasonable whisper. She leaned in close, her expensive perfume masking the smell of the damp concrete. She explained her twisted reality with terrifying calm. She claimed she was a martyr. She told me she could have gotten rid of me at birth. She told me she was a saint for keeping me alive, for feeding me, for protecting me from a world that would never understand our family's special bond. She patted my cheek, her manicured nails digging slightly into my skin. She told me I was finally paying rent for the air I was stealing. In her mind, my captivity was an act of profound motherly love. In her mind, she owned me. But she made one catastrophic miscalculation. She assumed my sisters were just as cold and hollow as she was. The rebellion started in small, invisible ways. When we were 7, Vanessa found the basement door unlocked for exactly 30 seconds. She peeked down the stairs and saw a mirror image of her own face staring back from the shadows. She didn't scream. She didn't run to our mother. That night, she brought Erica and Catherine down. They sat in a circle on my mattress, sharing a stolen box of crackers. From that day on, the triplets became my lifeline to the outside world. They smuggled down old textbooks, discarded electronics, and the Wi-Fi passwords to the main house. We communicated through coded taps on the water pipes. 2 taps meant Morgan was awake. 3 taps meant the house was empty. 4 taps meant danger. They were the golden children, showered in brand sponsorships and private tutors. But they chose to spend their midnights sitting on a concrete floor, holding the hands of a ghost. The illusion of safety shattered 3 weeks after our 18th birthday. Vanessa collapsed during a brand photo shoot. The live feed cut out. The mansion erupted into chaos. I pressed my ear against the cold metal of the ventilation duct, straining to hear the voices upstairs. The diagnosis was acute kidney failure. A genetic flaw. Panic consumed Morgan. But it was not the panic of a terrified mother. It was the panic of a CEO watching her stock plummet. Taking Vanessa to a public hospital would require admitting her genetic defect. It would shatter the illusion of the perfect, flawless triplets. The $5,500,000 parenting partnership required pristine medical records. Morgan paced the hardwood floors above my head. I heard the sharp clack of her heels stopping abruptly. She made her decision. The brand was more important than the law. The brand was more important than humanity. It was time to harvest the backup. The following night, the heavy deadbolt on my door clicked open. Morgan stood on the stairs, accompanied by a man carrying a massive black duffel bag. He smelled of stale cigarettes and rubbing alcohol. He was a disgraced, struck-off concierge surgeon, a man who asked no questions as long as the cash was untraceable. Morgan had purchased hospital-grade surgical equipment under the guise of setting up a holistic home hospice suite for Vanessa. She looked down at me, her face completely void of emotion. She stated the plan with clinical precision. She told me I would be heavily sedated the next morning. She told me the doctor would perform an extraction right here in the house, keeping Vanessa off the official hospital grids. She actually smiled, a terrifying, hollow stretching of her lips. She told me this was my purpose. She told me I was finally going to save the family. The heavy door slammed shut. The lock engaged. I sat in the darkness, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs. I stared at the concrete walls. They broke me when I was a child. They convinced me I was nothing but a collection of spare parts. But sitting in that dark room, listening to the hum of the ventilation system, a new sensation pushed through the terror. Rage. Pure. White-hot, magnificent rage. Today, I was no longer the victim. Today, I was the architect of their destruction. 4 taps echoed from the water pipe. Danger. I tapped back twice. I am ready. My sisters refused to let me be butchered. They could have easily looked the other way. They could have accepted the sacrifice to save their own privileged lives. But trauma bonds run deeper than blood. And the 4 of us had spent 18 years quietly forging a phalanx against our mother's insanity. We didn't need magic to defeat her. We just needed to pay attention. The technical bypass was analog, elegant, and flawless. Morgan relied heavily on a state-of-the-art smart security system. Digital keypads, motion sensors, and instant push notifications to her phone. She thought technology made her invincible. She forgot that technology is entirely dependent on the humans operating it. 2 days prior, Erica had casually leaned against the basement door while Morgan was distracted, smearing a thin layer of clear lip gloss across the digital keypad. The morning of the planned surgery also happened to be the morning of Morgan's massive launch party for the new brand deal. The mansion was swarming with caterers, lighting technicians, and sponsor representatives. Morgan was distracted, buzzing with adrenaline and arrogance. Down in the basement, I pulled a small ultraviolet flashlight from my mattress, a tool Catherine had smuggled down in a makeup bag months ago. I shined the purple beam onto the keypad. The lip gloss illuminated instantly, revealing the exact 4 numbers Morgan pressed every single day. Upstairs, the second phase of the trap snapped into place. Catherine casually walked past Morgan in the grand foyer, With a perfectly timed stumble, Catherine spilled an entire glass of sticky mimosa directly onto Morgan's phone. Morgan shrieked in fury. She frantically handed the dripping device to her assistant, ordering him to bury it in rice immediately. She was completely blind. Her digital eyes were severed. Without her phone, the motion sensors in the hallway had nowhere to send their push notifications. I typed the 4 numbers into the basement keypad. The light flashed green. The heavy deadbolt retracted with a soft click. I pushed the door open. The sudden blast of natural sunlight streaming through the mansion windows blinded me for a fraction of a second. The air smelled of fresh flowers and expensive catering. I stepped onto the plush carpet. I was no longer a ghost. I wore the exact same pastel designer dress my sisters wore, a spare outfit they had dropped down the laundry chute the night before. I didn't run into the living room screaming. I didn't grab a microphone or jump in front of her live streaming cameras to make a tearful, dramatic speech. That is what a victim would do. That is what a child begging for validation would do. I didn't want a public shouting match. I wanted total, irreversible annihilation. While Morgan stood in the living room, smiling into her ring lights and broadcasting her lies to millions of adoring fans. My sisters and I slipped into her private home office. The door locked silently behind us. Her corporate laptop sat open on the mahogany desk. Vanessa, pale but fiercely determined, bypassed the screensaver using the password she had memorized years ago. Morgan was currently in the middle of executing a massive wire transfer to the black market doctor. The transaction was queued up, waiting for final authorization. She was using a heavily disguised corporate account to pay for the illegal organ harvesting. She thought she was being clever. She thought her wealth made her untouchable. Vanessa's fingers flew across the keyboard. We didn't cancel the payment. We altered the routing. We took the $500,000 bribe meant for the disgraced surgeon and routed it directly through a known, federally flagged offshore account, dragging the transaction across 3 different state lines. We explicitly attached the digital signatures of her new corporate sponsors to the authorization forms. We tied her pristine brand directly to international wire fraud. But we didn't stop there. Erica pulled a small USB drive from her pocket. It contained a crystal clear audio recording from the hidden cameras the triplets had planted in the mansion weeks ago. It was the audio of Morgan explicitly negotiating the price of my kidney with the black market doctor. It was the audio of her calling me a biological asset with one keystroke. We sent the audio file, the altered wire transfer receipts, and the complete floor plans of the basement directly to the local field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, flagging the submission under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. We didn't need to expose her on a live stream. We just needed to hand her arrogance over to the federal government. We walked out of the office and stood quietly at the top of the grand staircase, looking down at the launch party. Morgan was in her element. She was laughing, holding a glass of champagne, basking in the adoration of her sponsors and her digital audience. She looked absolutely invincible. The heavy oak front doors of the mansion did not open politely. They were breached. Dozens of agents in tactical gear flooded the grand foyer. The music cut instantly. The caterers froze. The sponsors gasped, backing away in horror as federal agents swarmed the living room. They unplugged the ring lights. They kicked the tripods to the floor. The live stream went dark in a fraction of a second. Morgan's perfect, curated smile twisted into a mask of pure, screaming terror. She dropped her champagne glass. It shattered against the marble floor. She lunged forward, shrieking at the agents, demanding to speak to her lawyers, demanding to know who was responsible for ruining her party. The lead agent did not indulge her tantrum. He simply read her rights, his voice echoing coldly through the cavernous room. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit bodily harm, trafficking across state lines. Morgan thrashed furiously as the handcuffs locked tightly around her wrists. As the agents dragged her toward the front door, she finally looked up. She saw the four of us standing at the top of the stairs, four identical faces looking down at her. She saw me, the ghost she had buried in the concrete. Her eyes widened in absolute shock. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her empire was gone. Her wealth was frozen. Her pristine image was incinerated. She screamed my name. Primal. Guttural sound of defeat. But her voice was quickly muffled as the heavy mansion doors slammed shut behind her. In the hallway below, the black market doctor saw the federal jackets and realized the trap had sprung. He muttered a curse under his breath, dropped his medical bag, and sprinted toward the back patio doors. He didn't make it past the rose garden before three agents tackled him to the manicured lawn. My father, Marcus, stood trembling in the corner of the dining room. When an agent approached him with a pair of handcuffs, Marcus immediately fell to his knees, sobbing hysterically and offering to turn state's evidence against his wife in exchange for a lighter sentence. He folded exactly like the coward he had always been. The house fell completely silent. The flashing red and blue lights from the federal cruisers washed through the massive windows, painting the walls in the colors of justice. I looked at my sisters. We linked our hands together. Our palms were sweating. Our hearts were racing. But our shoulders were finally light. We walked down the grand staircase together. We walked out the front door, past the bewildered sponsors, past the shattered ring lights, and stepped out into the crisp, cool evening air. I took a deep breath. It was the first breath of true freedom I had ever tasted. The legal fallout was swift and merciless. Because we had tied the black market bribe to international routing and corporate sponsors, the federal prosecutors invoked civil asset forfeiture immediately. Morgan's bank accounts were frozen before she even reached the holding cell. The $5,500,000 brand deal was canceled by the sponsors within an hour of the arrest. The mansion was seized by the state. She was completely penniless overnight. She couldn't afford the high-powered defense attorneys she had always bragged about. She was assigned a deeply overworked public defender who urged her to take a plea deal. The judge sentenced Morgan to 12 years in federal prison with absolutely no possibility of early parole. The court also ordered a massive financial restitution, liquidating her remaining assets and placing $3 million into an irrevocable trust fund in my name. The community reaction was devastating. The neighborhood association released a public statement condemning her. Her millions of followers turned on her instantly, transforming her digital empire into a wasteland of furious comments and unfollows. She lost her reputation, her freedom, and her identity. Marcus accepted a plea deal for his cooperation, receiving a 5-year sentence in a minimum security facility. 6 months later, a thin, beige envelope arrived at the new apartment I shared with my sisters. It bore the return address of a federal correctional facility. I stood in the kitchen, the morning sunlight streaming through our open windows, and stared at Morgan's jagged handwriting. She wrote exactly what I expected her to write. She tried to play the victim. She tried to twist the narrative. She wrote that she was still my mother. She wrote that everything she did for the family. She claimed I owed her forgiveness because she gave me life. She tried to pluck the strings of guilt she had installed in my brain for 18 years. I didn't get angry. I didn't cry. I didn't write a furious letter back. I simply walked over to the kitchen sink, tore the letter into tiny, unrecognizable shreds, and drop them into the garbage disposal. I flipped the switch. The grinding noise drowned out her last desperate attempt at manipulation. That was the hollow echo of a defeated narcissist. She was screaming into a void, and I was no longer listening. My life now is unrecognizable from the concrete basement. Vanessa received a legitimate, legal kidney transplant through the National Registry, funded entirely by the trust the courts established. Erica and Catherine are attending a local university, studying law and psychology. We live in a spacious, bright apartment right in the heart of the city. We have massive windows that we leave open all day just to feel the breeze. We have friends who come over for dinner, neighbors who smile at us in the hallway, and a chosen family that respects our boundaries and honors our individuality. We are no longer identical assets. We are four distinct, independent women who chose each other when the world tried to tear us apart. Looking back at the darkness of those 18 years, the lessons burned into my psyche are profound and undeniable. I want to share these truths with you because I know there are others out there sitting in their own metaphorical basements, listening to the toxic voices upstairs, believing they are trapped. Rule number 1, blood is a biological accident. Loyalty is a conscious, active choice. Society pushes the dangerous narrative that you must unconditionally love and forgive the people who share your DNA. That is a lie designed to keep abusers comfortable. Family is not determined by a birth certificate. Family is determined by who stands in front of you when the world attacks. My sisters had every financial and social reason to abandon me. They chose loyalty over luxury. They became my true family the moment they risked their own safety to secure mine. Do not let toxic relatives hold your genetics hostage. You have every right to curate your table and only seat those who bring respect and safety to the meal. Rule number 2, narcissists only respect power and consequences. They never respect pity or negotiation. For years, I thought if I was just quiet enough, compliant enough, and invisible enough, Morgan would eventually show me mercy. I thought my suffering would eventually earn her love. But abusers do not have a quota for your pain. They will consume you until there is nothing left. You cannot reason with someone who views your destruction as their right. You cannot heal an abuser with your tears. The only language a true narcissist understands is the absolute, immovable boundary of a severe consequence. Hitting their ego, exposing their lies, and dismantling their power structure is the only way to break their grip. Stop trying to explain your pain to someone who is actively enjoying inflicting it. Rule number 3, your existence is an inherent right, not a debt you must repay to those who birthed you. Toxic parents are masters of installing the burden mindset. They will list the food they provided, the roof they maintained, and the basic decencies they offered as if they are massive loans you must spend your entire life working off. They will convince you that you are a burden, a biological tax they were kind enough to pay. Hear this clearly. You did not ask to be brought into this world. Basic human care is the bare minimum requirement of parenthood, not a heroic sacrifice. You do not owe anyone your future, your organs, or your sanity just because they provided the absolute minimum to keep you alive. You are allowed to exist entirely on your own terms. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to stand in the sunlight and breathe the air without apologizing for it. I spent 18 years as a ghost in the shadows, waiting for someone to give me permission to be real. I finally learned that permission is not given, it is taken. Have you ever felt like you were just playing a role in someone else's perfect picture? Have you ever had a family member demand gratitude for the basic respect they failed to give you? How long will you let them hold the camera and direct your life? Drop your story in the comments below. Let's remind each other that we are allowed to exist completely on our own terms, entirely free from the chains of guilt. I am Brooke Hayes. I survived the concrete. I survived the lies. And today, for the rest of my life, I am free. I know exactly what you are screaming at the screen right now. You are sitting there thinking, why did she stay down there for 18 years? Why didn't she fight back the second her sisters opened that basement door when they were 7 years old? It is incredibly easy to judge a situation like this from the comfort of the outside looking in. But what Morgan did to Brooke is a classic, terrifying example of intermittent reinforcement. In psychology, we call this the slot machine effect. Morgan gave Brooke just enough food, just enough shelter, and just enough twisted justification to keep her alive and pulling the lever, hoping for a jackpot of real maternal love that was never going to come. Brooke was not stupid. She was deeply conditioned. When a toxic person hands you crumbs of hope in a pitch black room, those crumbs look like a feast. You get addicted to the bare minimum of surviving, and you forget that you have the right to actually live. But let us break down the tape on how Brooke actually won, because this is where the absolute masterclass in self-defense happens. Brooke did not win by throwing an emotional tantrum on a live stream. She won through cold, street-smart execution. First, let us look at the lip gloss on the keypad. I call this the audit strategy. Abusers and scammers rely on you feeling intimidated by their wealth, their power, or their systems. They want you to think they are untouchable. Brooke did not try to magically hack a millionaire's security grid. She audited her mother's daily habits. She looked for the physical, analog details. Abusers hate details because details always expose the truth. Second, she focused on building the case. Brooke and her sisters did not just run to the local police with a wild story about a hidden room and a black market doctor. Narcissists can talk their way out of a story, but they cannot talk their way out of a paper trail. By altering the offshore wire transfer and securing the audio recordings, Brooke tied her mother's abuse directly to federal financial crimes and corporate sponsors. She did not argue with the narcissist. She handed her mother's arrogance straight to the federal government. Finally, let us look at the financial settlement. The court liquidated Morgan's remaining assets to establish a $3 million trust fund for Brooke. In the real world, think of this as the buyout. Brooke did not just escape. She extracted the capital she was owed for 18 years of stolen life. And she used it to invest in her permanent independence. Here is the verdict. And I need you to hear this clearly. Toxic people will always try to convince you that your survival is a debt you owe them. It is not. Blood does not make you family. Loyalty does. You are allowed to walk away from people who hurt you. Even if you share a last name, trust is earned. It is never owed. If you have ever had to audit your own life, cut ties, and walk away from a toxic dynamic to protect your peace, I want to hear your survival story. Drop it in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into the psychology of protecting yourself. And remember, you are the only investor who gets to control your future. Stay smart. And I will see you in the next one.